Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Friday, February 2nd. Today is the 119th day since October 7th. Some news from Washington, D.C. Secretary Blinken, the Secretary of State, has announced that he will be traveling from February 4th to 8th back to the Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and the West Bank. He had a conversation today with Saudi Arabia. This trip to the Middle East will be his fifth trip to the region since October 7th. And Secretary Blinken will continue, this is according to the State Department, will continue his diplomatic efforts to reach an agreement that secures the release of all remaining hostages and includes a humanitarian pause that will allow for the sustained increased delivery of humanitarian assistance into Gaza. He will continue to work to prevent the spread of conflict while reaffirming that the United States will take appropriate steps to defend its personnel and the right to freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. The Secretary will also continue discussions with partners on how to establish a more integrated, peaceful region that includes lasting security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. We'd announced in the last couple of days, hopes that there was progress being made on at least a temporary ceasefire. There's been no news in that regard. This last week, there also was the National Prayer Breakfast here in Washington, D.C. So yesterday, President Biden made remarks in a speech that he gave at that National Prayer Breakfast. He lamented the trauma and death and destruction in Israel and Gaza, saying, not only do we pray for peace, but we're actively working for peace, security, dignity for the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. He said, I'm engaged in this day and night, working to find the means to bring the hostages home, to ease the humanitarian crisis, and to bring peace to Gaza and Israel, and enduring peace with two states for two peoples. Axios just reported that the United States is considering the possibility of recognizing a Palestinian state. There's been quite a conversation about our conversations right now about a two-state solution, just a red herring, because you still have hundreds of people dying in Gaza every day. Yesterday, there was the significant news about Biden's sanctions being imposed on Israeli settlers who've been accused of attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. We do know that the news is reporting that Iran trained and funded militia groups targeting ships and U.S. troops in the Middle East, according to the U.S. Defense Secretary. But also Iran has been sending more conciliatory signals. So there seems to be indications that Iran wants to avoid war and further escalations. The U.S. military has said that it has destroyed more Houthi targets in Yemen, including 10 additional drones after identifying them as an imminent threat to ships in the Red Sea. I wanted to spend just a little bit of time today. I haven't given updates directly from OCHA in a while. That's the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. That is one of the most significant bodies that reports on statistics related to the occupied Palestinian territories and specifically Gaza. And when you read its daily reports, this is what it says about its key points related to Gaza. It says, intense Israeli bombardment from air, land, and sea continue to be reported across much of the Gaza Strip this is yesterday's report, February 1st, resulting in further civilian casualties, displacement, and destruction. Ground operations and fighting between Israeli forces and Palestinian armed groups continue to be reported across much of Gaza. Between the afternoons of January 31st and February 1st, 118 Palestinians were killed, 190 Palestinians were injured, and the total number, this is according to the health ministry, are at 27,019 Palestinians killed, 66,139 Palestinians injured. Between January 31st and February 1st, no Israeli soldiers are reported killed. But as of the 1st of February, the total number of soldiers is 222 soldiers killed and 1,293 soldiers injured in Gaza, according to the Israeli military. Thousands of Palestinians continue to flee to the southern town of Rafah, which now hosts more than half of Gaza's population of 2.3 million people. Most are living in structures, tents, or out in the open, according to UNRWA. On January 31st, UNRWA reported that some 184,000 people had registered for humanitarian assistance in the western outskirts of Khan Yunis. On February 1st, UNRWA stated that the colossal humanitarian needs of over 2 million people in Gaza now face the risk of deepening. The risks are deepening following the decision of 16 donor countries to stop their support of UNRWA. So a number of organizations like ours at CMEP are calling for the funding of UNRWA to be reinstated because there's no alternatives in terms of who's providing, the foundational humanitarian assistance in Gaza. According to the head of UNRWA, they say there is no other entity that has the capacity to deliver the scale and breadth of assistance to the 2.2 million people in Gaza that have such urgent needs. Healthcare in Gaza is extremely precarious. As of the 25th of January, only 14 of 36 hospitals in Gaza are even partially functional. There's heavy fighting near the vicinity of Nasser and Al Amaa hospitals in Khan Yunis, jeopardizing the safety of medical staff, the wounded and the sick, as well as thousands of internally displaced people. Israeli authorities on January 30th, the Israeli authorities returned the bodies of Palestinians killed in Gaza in recent weeks through the Kerem Shalom crossing. According to statements by the Israeli authorities, bodies are taken for identification to ascertain if they have been hostages. According to the Ministry of Health, between 80 and 100 bodies were received that were mostly unidentifiable because of decomposition and thus were buried in a mass grave. Also, on the 30th of January, Palestinians reportedly discovered at least 30 corpses that were buried in black bags under the sand in an UNRWA school in North Gaza. On December 7th, the facility was reportedly besieged and an unknown number of casualties were reported. The school had not been accessed by residents since about the 10th of December, and a fire had broken out, causing significant damage and reportedly forcing displaced people who were sheltering there to flee. On January 30th, there was also an airstrike on, there was a statement issued from a guest house in a community called Al-Mawasi. And according to the statement, an independent assessment by the United Nations concluded that there was damage there at this guest house that was a result of an airstrike. And they're claiming it's most likely because of an Israeli military airstrike because of the type of weaponry that was involved. And there's a report on that that's available. It resulted in significant damage to the building and required the withdrawal of 6 international emergency medical team members from Gaza. That is just the basic summary of the OCHA report, not going into any of the specific details in terms of water, in terms of healthcare, in terms of food. And so the needs for us to continue to call for ceasefire now are all the more urgent, to call for immediate return of the hostages in exchange for political prisoners, to ardently support efforts for a negotiated settlement that will say that these ongoing cycles of violence are not sustainable for anyone, for Palestinians in Gaza, for Palestinians in the West Bank, for Israelis, that a lasting resolution must be found. So continue in those efforts. If you're not signed up for our newsletters, I'd encourage you to do so. We have a lot of resources in terms of learning about what's happening. There are also opportunities not only for education, but we're continuing to gather together and to pray that we might not be discouraged, but that we would go before God, that we would seek interventions, and that we would continue to work together and to call for peace.